I'm Frank Carson, and welcome to Here and Abroad, a podcast that follows the U.S. men's national team and their player pool across Europe, MLS, or wherever else they play their club football. On today's show, we're going to look back on the USMNT's 3-2 loss to Türkiye, and then preview their path forward in the knockout round, starting with their round of 32 clash against Bosnia and Herzegovina on Wednesday. Joining me today is Ryan Tolmich. Ryan is the American soccer correspondent for Goal. So Ryan, let's start with this match against Türkiye. It looked like it was going to end in a 2-2 draw. Then Türkiye scored a goal with pretty much the last kick of the game to win it. I've seen and heard various viewpoints since then, ranging from it doesn't matter at all to this is really going to hurt the momentum to it's not the best, but we'll move forward. I mean, how did you feel about the match, and how do you think it's going to impact the U.S. going forward?
Yeah, it's a weird one, like you said, in that there's different ways to kind of view it. The way that I looked at it was you went into that game with three clear goals. One was to make sure Christian Pulisic was okay. Two was to avoid a suspension or a crucial injury or anything that would ruin your knockouts. And then three, to not let momentum slip away. You didn't want to go in there and get smashed 5-0 and then everyone's questioning everything. So I think realistically, check mark on all three of those things. Again, Pulisic looked great. Still waiting for an official update at Austin Trusty. I know they were kind of assessing him, but that was the big injury alongside, Christian Roldan getting looked at. And then three, again, look, you lose that game late with Trusty hobbling. It's a mistake. It's something Mauricio Pochettino will want to clean up. But it wasn't the type of game that ruined momentum. They played well. They got goals. They had moments to hang your hat on. They built confidence of some key players that could contribute down the line off the bench. So in that sense, I think it was a job well done. Obviously, like you said, you would have rather escaped with the draw just to not have any lingering questions or anything. But realistically, everything went about okay. It wasn't perfect, but it was okay. And it really did set the team up for the more important games to come, which I think is the biggest thing, more than winning a dead rubber final group stage game.
Yeah. Big picture, it's fine. And if you would have told me ahead of time that they would rotate nearly everybody and lose 3-2, I probably would have felt not too bad about that. It was just that the way it ended, on the last play, it was just this, for me, it was just this gut punch where it took me until the next day to feel more positive about it, because it just made me feel disappointed, at the end, because, he pretty much started the second choice lineup against Türkiye's best guys, and they got the early goal. Then I thought Türkiye gained some momentum, and I was starting to get concerned with how the game was going to go. But then after halftime, Berhalter got the goal to tie it. And then I really thought that the team, that second choice lineup took control of the game after that. And I thought they had the momentum and looked like the better team in the second half. And so I would have felt amazing if they could have got the winner, with that team. But with the draw and considering how it had gone, I would have just felt deeply satisfied, and how that went down. I mean, ultimately, I don't think it's going to make much of a difference, but I did find myself a little reeling afterwards.
And it felt like the players felt the same way after. The vibe in the mix zone with the players wasn't exactly upbeat. There was obviously, Sebastian Berhalter was happy that he got his goal or everything, but I don't think anyone walked out of that being that was fun. We did a good job, mission accomplished. It seemed like everyone was pretty down and frustrated. Which again, might end up being a good thing. It was a nice little reminder of what a World Cup game is like. I think everyone has kind of forgotten a little bit with the joy of the first two games, how hard it is to win a World Cup game and that you can't just waltz in and beat teams. And it's extremely difficult. And you saw that with Germany and Ecuador. You've seen that several times through this tournament with big teams drawing teams you wouldn't expect. It's really hard to win a World Cup game. So for that team to walk in that scenario and play a Turkey team who had nothing to lose and everything, really, so much pride to be fighting for, and that we're going to go out and attack and try and get those goals. Again, I think the performance was just fine. I think, those in the team were very disappointed by how it ended, rightfully so. But again, I think it sets the team up for what the big picture is, which is obviously the start of this knockout round where the games really do matter.
Yeah. And I think we have to at least briefly mention the Poch's press conference afterwards. I believe you were there in the room. Is that right?
No, I was in the way it worked. I was in the mix zone, so they separate. You can't do one or the other, but we were listening.
Okay.
And yeah, it was it wasn't quite the tone that I was expecting. We'll put it that way. It was a little bit tense and a little bit awkward. But again, I think part of that is just the emotions of what happened at the end. Like you said it felt like a gut punch, and I think a lot of people in that room would agree, including probably the coach himself. It seemed like he was pretty frustrated by some aspects. And again, that's a good thing. I think it's a good thing to have that kind of reminder and have that kind of be part of the build to this next game, because there's no more room to have any more gut punches at this point going forward.
Yeah. And for those who haven't seen the press conference, heard about it, I'll just mention, Poch, he took a lot of issue with the question, seemed to be upset that people were not congratulating him on winning the group. And it was a very tense press conference. I kind of expected that somebody was going to ask him a question around regulars, or backups, in which we know he doesn't like those words, but I thought maybe a reporter who wasn't as familiar with the team would ask that, and that would set him off. But it didn't seem to take much to set him off. He was pretty prickly, but I'm sure he'll get over it, just like all of us have, as well. Well, let's look ahead then. Okay, so now the U.S. is in the round of 32. You and I are recording this on Saturday, so we don't know the full bracket, but we know a lot of the U.S.'s side of the bracket. And I want to get your thoughts on that, because, you can, of course, control your own destiny by, how you finish in the group, but then there's also some luck kind of involved, in terms of like who falls on, your side of the bracket. When you take a look at the U.S.'s side of the bracket, how are you feeling about that?
It's about what you would expect. For a few days there, it did look like the U.S. was going to get pretty lucky, because it looked like that Belgium was not going to take care of business, and then that would instead slide to an Egypt-South Korea game that would set up the round of 16. Didn't work that way. Belgium went out and did what they had to do, and Egypt did not find their win against Iran. So now it is Belgium on that side, which, again, 3 weeks ago is something we would have predicted, but 3 days ago looked like it wasn't necessarily going to be the case. Realistically, look, this is kind of what everyone thought it was going to look like. You're going to have your round of 32 opponent, which is a good Bosnia and Herzegovina team, and then from there, it's like, all right, once you reach the round of 16, you're going to have to beat good teams. That is the way here, and that is something that the U.S. has certainly learned at World Cups historically. They certainly learned it last time with what happened when they played the Netherlands, and it's just, look, if you want to be one of the good teams, you're going to have to beat the good teams. That's something that this team still has to prove. And theoretically, they're going to get a chance to prove it, but they do have to get through this first game against Bosnia and Herzegovina first, which is not going to be a cakewalk by any stretch, because this is not a team that's going to be afraid of that challenge. So yeah, I think every game for the U.S. going forward is difficult. There's no avoiding difficult games in World Cups. So that is the challenge being thrown their way. And again, whatever you want to make of the path, you're going to have to beat good teams on the way. So now we just know which good teams that it's actually going to be.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. It is kind of surprising how much it just kind of ended up how we expected it to end up, even like 4 or 5, 6 months ago when we got our first look at the draw. You think about how it could have gone. You think of like some worst case scenarios. There's always a chance that a really good team doesn't do well and they end up third place, and you have to play them in the round of 32. Didn't happen. Not to take anything away from Bosnia, but of course, any team in the round of 32, to your point, any match in the World Cup is going to be hard. But you like your chances against a team like Bosnia, and then Belgium. I don't know what to think of this Belgium team yet, because they've looked, they came on strong last night, ended up winning the group, what they were supposed to do, but they've also shown some issues, and we don't quite know who Belgium is going to play yet. I have the Athletics bracket predictor in front of me. It looks like they're giving South Korea 44% chance, Senegal 33%, Algeria 13%. By the time people listen to this, they'll probably know. But yeah, it's probably going to be Belgium. And then if you keep looking ahead, it would be Spain in the quarterfinals, France in the semifinals. We don't need to get ahead of ourselves, but it's just going to keep getting harder and harder, as you would expect. But the other thing I want to point out, in terms of like how luck can play a part in this, I mean, you look at somebody like Mexico. Okay, so Mexico
did not get lucky. The draw did not fall their way at all,
and they did everything that they could. Right, they won all their matches, got first place, but they're going to likely play Ecuador in the round of 32, and then likely play England in the round of 16. I mean, and so the U.S. I do think got very, very fortunate.
Yeah, Mexico again. That is one where they got matched up in the round of 32 with a team that is not going to be overwhelmed by everything that they bring, which is that was their advantage, in that you walk into the Azteca and you have the environment and the altitude, and Ecuador is not going to be fazed by the altitude in the slightest. The environment surely will play a part, it'll be a crazy thing, but again, it won't be the same as, say a Scotland walking in and having to deal with the heat, the altitude, the fan presence. Like, it would have been much more difficult for a European team to walk in there. So yeah, that's a tough break for Mexico, because then again, like you said, probably England after that. And that is not necessarily a fun matchup either. That was the thing that we discussed, I think, several months ago when the draw came out. It was the U.S.'s round of 16 opponent. If you had to pick one of the like quote unquote heavy hitter European sides, Belgium might have been the one that you would be most okay with playing. You don't want to run into France. You don't want to run into, Germany or England. So maybe this is still, the one that we kind of all circled when this came out. And, maybe we'll get there. We'll have to see if both teams could do what they have to do in the round of 32 to set it up.
Yeah. It would be a nice full circle moment, because, we played Belgium in the round of 16 in 2014. And that was like when their golden generation was young, right? The people were first starting to talk about Belgium. And now they're kind of like on the end of that, or it seems. So it'll be interesting. Okay, so we're not, Ryan and I, we're not saying we should get ahead of ourselves. We know this game against Bosnia is going to be tough. So looking at that game specifically, Wednesday night we play them in Santa Clara, I believe. What are you going to be watching for in that match?
One of the things that has been sort of the story, not the story of the World Cup, but has been how the U.S., particularly in those first two games, was the protagonist, as they say. It's the team that really set the tone and dictated how the game was going to be. And I think that was one of the not mistakes, but misconceptions about the last World Cup. Was there was a point where everyone thought that being the protagonist meant that you had the ball and you were doing this. But I think what they learned against the Netherlands is that, sometimes the other team's okay with that, and that's them actually dictating the game. And that, yeah, the U.S. had some of the ball against the Netherlands, but the Netherlands was letting them have it. And then when it was time for them to do their thing, they did their thing. But that's been the impressive part of these first two games, is that the U.S. has set the tone through everything. Australia and Paraguay, that was entirely the type of game that the U.S. wanted to play, and every single aspect of that game was executed on the U.S.'s terms. So can they go out and do that again now that, theoretically the quote-unquote main players are going to be back in the team? Can they go out and dictate what this game is going to look like? Can they tactically set something up in a way that does make Bosnia and Herzegovina uncomfortable? That's the thing. Again, like, what is that going to look like, and who is going to kind of set the tone? And if the U.S. can do that again, then great. But it's not going to be easy, because this is a Bosnia and Herzegovina team that is not going to be afraid. They beat, Italy and Wales to get here. They're a team that has to, survive going through European teams all the time. They have players in top leagues. This is not going to be a team that looks at this American team as afraid of anything they're going to do. So, yeah, what is the game going to look like, and who is going to kind of, determine what it plays like? I think that's the thing that's most interesting to me, because for the first time in, our lifetimes, the U.S. is the team capable of dictating what that game is going to look like in a knockout game. That is not something that's particularly familiar. So that's going to be the interesting part of it to watch for me.
Why do you think, comparing like how they played against Paraguay and Australia, the being able to dictate the complete match versus, 4 years ago against the Netherlands, having a lot of possession, but not necessarily dictating? I mean, what's the difference? Like, what are they, what is it that enables them to dictate now versus 4 years ago? They weren't. Is it the way they are out of possession, the pressing, the intensity? I mean, what do you think?
The pressing is definitely one. That is one thing that Mauricio Pochettino teams have always been known for is the high press, go win the ball back. And that's one thing, particularly in the Paraguay game, that was super impressive to watch. Is like you just saw how high the line was, and you saw that when the U.S. lost the ball, it was pack of wolves ready to go get that back, and we're going to take risks, we're going to get that back, which meant that Paraguay could never really get out of their own half, and that is not a good place to be. And you saw the way that worked against Australia. It was a lot of similar things. You know, obviously they changed some things. They focused on playing out wide more. They had, you know, Australia's wingbacks were not having a particularly fun time dealing with Serginho Dest and Weston McKennie. But yeah, again, those were tactical decisions that the U.S. made. You know, they were deciding where they were going to attack and how they were going to attack and what they were going to do with the ball. And again, against that Netherlands team, the Netherlands was just kind of content waiting for the U.S. to make a mistake and make that counterattack. So I think the big difference is when the U.S. does have the ball, they have the ability to choose what they're going to do with it, and they have the quality to make that difference. And again, it's just there's tactical ideas also to just go out and get it back immediately when those ideas don't necessarily work out. So yeah, I think it's just a culmination of a lot of things. You know, this is it's not exactly like a flip a switch and everyone gets it sort of moment. It's a lot of different things kind of coming together with the team being mature enough to do that, having the right sort of players, having the tactics to kind of dictate it. And again, I think all of those things aligned in those first two games. And you know, again, like you said, in parts of that Turkey game. But yeah, we'll have to see how it looks in this game because again, this is a whole different animal that, you know, fortunately for the U.S., they've had some time to prepare for because of the situation of them winning the group a little bit early. So that is something of an advantage.
Yeah, you got to think with a coach like Pochettino, you know, having one of the elite coaches, you know, in the world, you give him more time to prepare. That's going to be something that goes, you know, heavily, you know, in your favor. Yeah, I think the two notes I have written here that I'm looking for is can they match the intensity that they did against Paraguay, especially in the first half, which, you know, a lot of people, you know, arguably what a lot of people consider like the greatest half they've ever seen the U.S. play in a World Cup. You know, can they match that? Can they come out and just smother Bosnia with the energy, with the intensity, with the swarming, with the crowd behind them, you know, like the way it felt in SoFi Stadium? I mean, can they make it feel like that? You know, again, it's a hard ask because that was beautiful, right? But can they do that? And then I'm also curious about, can they get another early goal? Because you play these teams like Paraguay, Australia, Bosnia that you know are going to sit in and be tough defensively. It's been so helpful in all of their matches, even against Turkey, to get the early goal. We haven't seen them, you know, get deep into games still at 0-0. And I feel like has been an issue with this U.S. team in the past is, you know, you get to the 60th minute, haven't scored the goal. You know, you start pressing, getting nervous, you start needing it more and more. They haven't had to do that, you know, and so I'm curious, can they come out and get that right away again, or will they put themselves in a position where, you know, it's going to be more tense because they're even late in the game.
Yeah, that is, like you said, that is the one thing we haven't really seen too much of yet. I mean, I guess we saw it for a little bit in the Turkey game, but we haven't seen them have to like chase a goal late. You know, we haven't seen them in a situation where there's 10 minutes left and they need a goal, and that's the definition of everything that's going on. Again, that's because there's been no qualifying and there's been so few, you know, meaningful games over the last years. But yeah, this group, you know, what again, quote unquote main group, there's been so few chances to really see them in high pressure losing situations. So that'll be, again, an interesting thing to watch is if it does get tight, if it does get tense, you know, how do they sort of play their way out of that, and what does that look like? But again, it would be really nice. I think everyone would be pretty happy if they could set an early tone by getting a goal within the first 10 minutes again, because that has made everyone breathe a little bit easier in all three games so far.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm used to feeling a lot of tension when I watch U.S. games, and I got to be honest, I thought, you know, during the World Cup, I'd feel the most tension. And to be honest, I did feel some in the Australia match, you know, because when we were up 2-0 and they started getting a hold of the game, you knew that if they got a goal, then it was going to get like super tense, and you knew you didn't want that. But for the most part, I've been pretty relaxed during this World Cup.
I was saying ahead of the Turkey game, I was like, what a unique situation in that American fans are going to watch a World Cup game where it's not, pit of stomach the whole time. This could be the end of it all. Like it was again, it's still a World Cup game. You get excited. You want everyone to go in there and win. But I was like, it is very unique seeing Twitter today being like, man, I'm just going to enjoy this one.
Yeah.
Like, this is going to be really fun. Like there's very few times where you go into watching your team play a meaningful game and the thought is, wow, this could be fun tonight. Like that was a unique one. And again, now it's right back to the pit of stomach, cross your fingers, do whatever lucky things you've been doing and hope for the best, because that there was one game of that and now that is over.
Yeah, it was weird. Last week getting ready for that match against Türkiye was weird. Let's talk about the starting lineup. Pochettino's going to put this starting lineup together for the match against Bosnia. What are you thinking? Is he going to make any changes versus what he rolled out against Paraguay?
No, I wouldn't. I think, look, we only got to see that lineup for 45 entire minutes, which is crazy because, again, we've seen 3 games and we've seen the first choice group together for a total of 45 minutes because of Christian Pulisic's injury and everything there. But, yeah, I don't think there's any doubt that that's the group. I think that has been further solidified, especially in the Turkey game. If there were any questions about anybody, I don't think those are there anymore. You look at the way that some of the guys that were, quote unquote, had points to prove have played. Alex Freeman's been spectacular. There were questions about if he'd be ready for the World Cup level, and like he's looked great. Malik Tillman, it was like, hey, can he play in this position that's a little bit different than what he's used to? And he's been one of the best midfielders in the tournament in terms of, doing things on both sides of the ball that impact games. So yeah, again, I think it's pretty clear what this team, knock on wood, everybody fit, everything's healthy, looks like. I think that Paraguay starting 11 is the group. But I think the other thing we learned is that there are a few guys that could hop in and make a difference if they need to. Someone like Sebastian Berhalter. If someone, if he's fit, Austin Trusty has shown able to play to the level. Someone like Gio Reyna can come off the bench and score a ridiculous Trivela that can make a difference in the end. So look, there are guys that could come in, but I think it's pretty clear that there's an 11 that fits best both technically and tactically and talent-wise. I think there is a pretty established group that should be expected to start this game.
Yeah, I agree. It would be absolutely shocking to me if he rolls out anything but the exact same starting 11 that he did against Paraguay. I mean, outside of injury, I can't even come up with a reason why you would justify it.
Yeah, I don't think there's even a position battle that, again, maybe before the tournament, if you had said oh man, if Pepe gets hot in one of these first 3 games, maybe he starts the knockouts. But I think Balogun has shown that he's just absolutely on another level. So I think he's pretty clear. And again, the midfield's somewhat thin. When you look at Serginho Dest and how he's played, he's a no-doubter right now over Tim Weah. I think everyone in that group has solidified their place in that group. And then you just roll the dice and go from there. It seems like that Pochettino now definitely has his guys, and those are the guys that are going to be the ones that make or break what happens next.
Yeah. Yeah, I do think, Pepe and Weah were the ones who had the most to play for, in that last Türkiye match, and they were the players that you thought if anybody was going to push a starter, it would be those two. Pepe, I thought, did just fine. Weah, I thought, did not do just fine. I mean,
he was put out on that wing, and Pochettino has said several times that he likes him on the left because they did some sort of eye test that says that the way he receives the ball and the way he reacts, he sees the field better over there. But he doesn't dribble past people better over there. You could tell he was hesitant and doing things backwards half the time, and that led to him straying offside. It just didn't work. So yeah, look, if you start him on the right side, maybe that makes a little bit of a difference. But again, Serginho Dest has been having a field day out there against some of these defenders. So I don't think you make that change anytime soon. So yeah, I think that kind of sets it up where, this is what the group is. Again, I agree with you in that those two were the ones who had a chance to, maybe put some question marks in there, but I don't think they really did anything that would lead to those question marks popping up.
No, I still think you could bring Pepe in late, if you really needed a goal. But I think
I did like how he played with Balogun. I think he in the Australia game, I think he did a lot of little dirty work. I think he did a good job of occupying the center back. So if you get to a point where Bosnia sitting in and you need a goal, like, yeah, that makes sense. And you know he can do it. But again, when you're starting the game off, I think you want to get everybody else on the field. But again, I'm not saying those guys don't have a part to play. I'm just saying I think that the 11 is the Paraguay 11.
Yeah, I agree. And I do think Sebastian Berhalter is the one guy who has raised his stock throughout the group stage and who raised his stock some more against Türkiye. Not enough to get into the starting 11, but I do think he's the guy. He's the substitute that's going to play the most minutes probably going forward. I mean, Poch clearly trusts this guy, and he is just – you can see him building confidence as well, you know, looking like he belongs up there, not scared of anything. And what he gives you on set pieces, what he gives you with if the ball does fall to him somewhere outside the box or he gets a clean look at goal, being able to score – and then just the work rate. I mean, he's a player that, I mean, it wasn't more than 2 or 3 months ago, I saw people putting him on the bubble and like not making this World Cup roster. And now he's the first guy off the bench. It's amazing.
Yeah, it's been interesting too. One of the little stories I have there is just like, again, you go on social media and it is somewhat of an echo chamber, and there are people with their nitpicks of his game. I think there are a lot of, you know, MLS versus Europe truthers who are quick to say that someone else should be there or someone else would do better. But it was interesting for me speaking with a couple of the journalists here from England who, you know, don't watch him regularly or don't know all of the backstory. And all of them are just like, hey, this Berhalter kid's a hell of a player. They're like, he could hit a ball. He works his ass off. He could, you know, he wins it back. They're like, this guy's got a little something. So yeah, again, like it's one of those things where if you hadn't seen him before and you didn't have your preconceived notions and you just watched what he did in that last game, obviously, look, not perfect, but you'd go, all right, there's a player there. Like there's something that can contribute. So yeah, I think that is something that the world is starting to maybe accept and realize about Sebastian Berhalter is like, look, there is something there. And if you look past his last name or whatever notions you have about MLS players, like you'd realize that this guy has a part to play.
Yeah. Maybe he's setting himself up for a good summer transfer, you know, over to Europe. You know, I know there's rumors out there and he's not, he doesn't have a long-term deal at Vancouver. In fact, I feel like, isn't he going to be able to like negotiate with other teams this summer?
Yeah, he is entering the final months of his deal. So yeah, look, that is one of the things the World Cup does is it puts you in the shop window for everybody. So he is a person who could certainly benefit from another good game or two. I think we could put it that way.
Yeah. Okay, last thing I want to ask you about, Ryan, is Bosnia as an opponent. You know, we've talked about them a little bit, but what else do you think is important for fans to know about this team, Bosnia?
I think the biggest takeaway for me, again, in doing my own, you know, look and seeing everything to do is that this isn't a team that's going to get overwhelmed by anything that goes into this. Look, they had to play the 2 playoff games against Wales and Italy to get here. And those are about as high pressure of a game as you're going to get. You know, you go to pens, you're against, you know, teams that have, you know, Wales was in the last World Cup. Italy obviously has the World Cup history, and they stared them down and they didn't blink. And I think that's wildly impressive. And then you go, well, okay, why is that? And you look through their team, and obviously you have Edin Dzeko, who everyone knows. You have Kolasinac, who has played at a high level. But you look at some of the clubs, and it's Bundesliga, Serie A. Like, these are guys who play in big leagues and are familiar with the challenges and have the ability to grind out games because they're a part of it. So that's what's going to be interesting for me, is that this team isn't going to fold. This team isn't going to be shocked by anything. This team is going to have some support in the stadium because there's a huge population of Bosnia and Herzegovina people living in the U.S. who came here as refugees of the 90s. Like there's going to be some vibes in this stadium, and I don't think they're going to be overwhelmed by any of it. So anyone who expects the U.S. to just go in and like mow them over, like that's not going to happen. Like this team's here for a reason. And one of the big reasons is because they have not folded in games where people expected them to. So yeah, I think that's going to be interesting. But on the flip side, there was a result against Switzerland that showed that they are capable of being played through. They're not an elite team. They're not a top team. They're not a world-class defense. So yeah, they can lose a game, but they're also not going to lose it because they lost their heads or because they stunk. Like, this is a good team, and to beat them, you're going to have to play well. So I think that's going to be the big thing for me is, does the U.S. show up and play to their level? If they do, they are the better team, but they're not going to, this is not a team you could show up against and mail it in and hope for the best. This is going to be a really tricky opponent to deal with.
Yeah. And you certainly don't want to be in a tight game with them late, right? Because they're just going to get more and more confident. They've already survived penalties, twice, I believe, during the final European knockouts to get in. Yeah, they finished third in Group B with 4 points. They tied Canada 1-1, lost to Switzerland 4-1, and beat Qatar 3-1. What I think is interesting here, and what maybe gives me the most nerves, is just not necessarily even Bosnia, but the U.S.'s history against European teams. In the World Cup, let me do the quick math here. 21. Yeah, we've played European teams 21 times. 1 win, 7 draws, 13 losses. Okay, so 1 win out of 21. Yep. And it's not all elite European teams. It's the broadest range. Yeah. You also look at the U.S.'s recent history in official FIFA windows. We've lost 9 straight to European opponents. And so we just don't seem to match up well with European opponents. I know I hate to generalize all European opponents the same, but you have to look at these stats and think there's something there.
Yeah, no, that is, again, we were talking about that European stat after the game the other day, because it's unfortunate because they had a chance to get away from it. And that was the thing about the Turkey game is, again, everyone's talking about they've lost this many games against European teams in a row. And if they just don't give up a late goal, we could just not talk about that. But again, that is now a storyline heading into this game, is what can they do against a European team? Because they have traditionally struggled, even going back to last World Cup, draw Wales, draw England, lose to the Netherlands. So it is a mountain that needs to be climbed, whether it's real or not, to be determined. But yeah, look, there is no doubt that the stats say that the U.S. has a point to prove in this game. And it's one that this group has had to prove for years, but hasn't for a variety of reasons. Obviously a lot of those games, there's friendlies in there, and some of those teams are just really good. I don't think anyone's like, oh man, they didn't beat Portugal and Germany. That's crazy. It's like, no, those are pretty good teams. But again, they have to prove that they can. And this is a good hurdle for them to do that and maybe finally put that stuff to bed before, again, potentially getting into later stages where they're going to have to do it again and again and again. Yeah.
Get the monkey off our back against Bosnia, and then we can move on, not worry about it, in the future rounds. That's how I'm hoping it goes. All right, Ryan, are you still sending people over to X to who want to follow your work, or where are you sending people these days?
X or Instagram, whatever, wherever you prefer. Both of those are active, and been posting plenty on both throughout this World Cup journey. We're just about a month into it now since the roster unveiling, so it's been quite a journey, and theoretically it's going to go on for a little bit longer. So this is it's all a very exciting time, and like I said, lots going on X, on Goal, on Instagram, on everything, because it is the World Cup, and I hope everyone else is having fun with it, because it has been a pretty good thing to be a part of.
All right, cool. I'll make sure and link over the show notes to those accounts and also to your work at Goal. Thank you so much for joining the show today, and enjoy the game on Wednesday.
Awesome. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
And thanks to everyone for listening to Here and Abroad. If you enjoyed the episode, please do me a huge favor and hit that subscribe button if you're watching on YouTube, or that follow button if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or somewhere else. Thank you so much. I'm Frank Garza. You can follow me on X or Blue Sky at Frank Garza 007, and I'll be back next week with a new episode.